You wanted the best. You've got the best podcast. The hottest podcast in the world. The Chris Voss Show, the preeminent podcast with guests so smart you may experience serious brain bleed. Get ready. Strap yourself in. Keep your hands, arms, and legs inside the vehicle at all times, because you're about to go on a monster education roller coaster with your brain. Now, here's your host, Chris Voss.
Hi, folks. Chris Voss here from the ChrisVossShow.com, the ChrisVossShow.com. Hey, we're coming here with another great podcast. We certainly appreciate you guys tuning in. Thanks for being here. Be sure to refer the show to your friends, neighbors, relatives. Ask, hey, have you subscribed to the Chris Voss Show? Tell them to go to iTunes and hit that subscribe button. And if you love the show, give it a good referral. Go on there and give us a 5-star rating and tell us how great we are. If not, send me an email and tell me how much you hate me. But you're still listening to the show, so I love you anyway. Anyway, guys. Go to youtube.com/Chris Voss, hit the bell notification button. Also, go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss. You can see everything we're reading and reviewing over there. And also go to all of our groups on Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok. And there's just one every day they put out nowadays, so be sure to follow them as well. Today, as always, as every single podcast episode, we have the most brilliant people on the show. The most brilliant people, the most brilliant guests. And now that I've made my new guest sweat because I've got to be brilliant too, which of course he is. He's actually a doctor. We know he must be brilliant. It takes a lot of work to become a doctor. And he has written his newest book, the U.S. version. This is going to be coming out June 2nd, 2021. He is the author, Dr. Salvador Macip. He wrote the book, Modern Epidemics, From the Spanish Flu to COVID-19. So today's conversation is going to be quite interesting and eye-opening as well. And this episode is brought to you by a sponsor, ifi-audio.com, and their micro iDSD signature. It's a top-of-the-range desktop transportable DAC and headphone app that will supercharge your headphones. It has 2 brown burr DAC chips in it and will decode high-res audio and MQA files. We're using it in the studio right now. I've loved my experience with it so far. It just makes everything sound so much more richer and better and takes things to the next level. IFI Audio is an award-winning audio tech company with one aim in mind: to improve your music enjoyment of quality sound, eradicate noise, distortion, and hiss from your listening experience. Check out their new incredible lineup of DACs and audio enhancement devices at ifi-audio.com. He is a doctor, researcher, and writer. He obtained his PhD and MD degree at the University of Barcelona, Spain in 1998, and then he moved to oncology research at the Mount Sinai Hospital in New York. Since 2008, he is the head of the Mechanisms of Aging and Cancer Lab at the University of UK. Correct me on that, Salvador, if you will. Did I name that right?
No, nobody. It's Leicester, but nobody from
University of Leicester. That is clearly not spelled Leicester, but we'll let that slide. Where he also has an associate professor at the Department of Molecular and Cellular Biology. These are big words. I went to public school, clearly. He is also a researcher and professor at the Universitat Oberta de Catalunya.
Yeah, you got that pretty well, yeah.
All right, cool. I'm 1 for 2. In Barcelona since 2020, he's published over 30 books in Catalan. His Catalan is a native language, including fiction, children's stories, and essays. Some of his books have been translated into Spanish, French, German, Italian, Portuguese, Korean, Chinese, and received awards for the European Prize for Popular Science in 2013. And he's published a ton of other books in English as well. I'll let you check that out. Welcome to the show, Salvador. My apologies for butchering half of the universities you went to.
Thank you. Thanks, Chris.
I clearly need to, get a job or something. Go back to school. But this is the reason that you're a doctor and I'm not. So give us your plug, Salvador, on where people can find you on the interwebs. Salvador, give us your plugs on where people can find you on the interwebs.
Yeah, sorry, if you look for me on Twitter, my name is Dr. Macip, and that's basically my main activity, and also on Instagram.
There you go. What motivated you want to write this book? You've written a whole lot of other material. What motivated you to write this one?
I've always been fascinated by microscopic life, by microbes. And this book started actually when I was in Mount Sinai in New York. And I was working on cancer, but I had a few friends that were working on viruses. So one of these things that you go there and say, oh, what are you working on? And I started getting interested in that. And we did some collaborations, and I thought it's amazing. I clearly know nothing about microbes. So let's do some research and let's learn about this. And all that interest led to realizing that microbes, or all the microscopic world, is quite unknown. The average citizen doesn't know much about viruses, bacteria, and so on. So I thought, okay, might as well share some of that knowledge and try to write a book that explains a bit what are microbes, what is a bacteria, what is a virus, why it's important, why they can be good, they can be bad. And this is how this book started. And this was 10 years ago. And that's when I wrote the first version of the book. And this is the updated version now to include COVID and other stuff.
Cool, man. That's awesome. So give us an overarching thing of the book, what it's about and what it entails in detail.
What
or
I
not
wanted,
in detail, just give us
how much time do you have?
Read the whole damn book.
So my main goal was basically to study the relationship between humans and microbes, because we see bacteria, viruses as our enemies, and we are here fighting a war. And you can always hear, especially now with COVID, everything you can hear is the war against COVID or the war against viruses. But actually, we coexist. We share the same planet. There's many more microbes than humans in the planet. So, and if you put them all together, they would weigh more than all the animals in the planet. So we are sharing the same space. And this means that it's not only a war, it's a relationship that has good things and bad things. And actually life would not be possible without viruses and bacteria as we know it. And the problem is that some of them, yes, do cause disease, and they are a big issue. And we're in the middle now of a pandemic, so I don't need to explain to you how bad things can get. But there's also a lot of bacteria that are actually needed. So we are full of bacteria, actually. Our bodies have as many microbes as human cells. You have probably is a mix. The human body is a mix of human cells and a lot of bacteria and viruses that are living with us inside and outside our bodies that actually help us in our sort of everyday functions in our body. So that's what I wanted to explain in the book. So there's good bacteria, bad bacteria, and bad viruses. And more than trying to fight them, we need to understand them first. And if you understand them, then I think you open the door to a very interesting world, a lot of things that you can learn about them.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Wow, I just feel like a polluted junk heap right now, like a little garbage. Why do I bother cleaning my house if half of me is walking bacteria? It seems like
indeed. Yeah, actually, no, it's better if you have your bacteria and you keep it healthy. Sure. For the average adult, if you have a 70 kilogram, I wouldn't know the US equivalent, but out of 70 kilos of a human body, it would be 2 kilos of bacteria and viruses if you put them all together. So it's quite a nice chunk, quite a chunk of microbes that we have on top of us. And actually, over the years, we're realizing that the bacteria we have, for instance, in our insides, in our stomach and in our gut, actually, it plays a big role in our health. Depending on the bacteria you have in your gut, that can influence whether you are thin or you are fat, or whether you are healthy or not healthy. And it can even influence your mental health. So things that you would say, how is that happening? So this is very interesting. So how these small things, these microbes, actually influencing things like your brain. So a lot of research here.
Yeah. And this is really interesting. So if I'm overweight, it can affect it's a dumb question, but I'll ask it anyway. So if I'm overweight, my microbes can fuck me up in the brain and stuff?
It's a bit more complex than that, but yeah, I think it's a two-way street. What you eat determines what kind of microbes you're going to have in your gut. And these microbes are going to influence also how you process food. And they could eventually have some influence in your brains, good or bad. So this is a field that is starting now to explode, and there's a lot that we don't know yet. But I think over the years it's going to become more and more clear that this symbiotic relationship we have with our bacteria it's not only something that happens in infections. Like one of the things we know is that our bacteria help us prevent infections by the bad bacteria. But it goes farther than that. It goes up to other aspects of our health, from mental health to anything else that our body is processing.
That's interesting. You talk about in the book, you start with the Spanish flu, and you talk about what that is about and the origins of that. Tell us about what you discuss on that topic and how you take that all the way up to COVID.
Yeah, I think actually to start with Spanish flu, we need to say that it's not the best name because it was not Spanish flu. It's actually probably coming from the US, so it should be perhaps called the American flu. The problem is that Europe was in the middle of a war at the time, and this was 1918, the First World War. And nobody was paying much attention to infections. And Spain was the first one to say, oh, look, there's a new infection here. There's something happening that is different. And that's why it got stuck as a Spanish flu. And actually, since from then until now, there's been this tradition of assigning names to the diseases related to the place where they were discovered. That's why we have Ebola, and we have other diseases that had names of places. Now we're trying to change that because that it's not seen today. That's why COVID is not called the Wuhan syndrome or something. It just has this different name. Basically, the Spanish flu is probably the last big pandemic that hit us before COVID. And there's definitely a lot more in the book. Actually, I talk about other pandemics before that. And since we have records, historical records, we have notices and stories about infectious diseases, epidemics, pandemics, things that are basically part of our history. And Spanish flu, I think it's important because it hit the world in a way that was perhaps at that time seen as something that maybe it could not happen at the time. This was the beginning of the 20th century. We already started having more knowledge about science, and we were still being hit by a new virus, in this case, a flu virus that caused millions of deaths. And it was thought after that was basically the last big one. So because after that, we started having antibiotics that help control the bacterial diseases. We started having antivirals to control the viruses. We started having vaccines. And I think we started the 21st century with the idea that this is not going to happen to us again. So pandemics like the Spanish flu or big crises like that is not going to happen. Obviously, we were quite wrong, as we all know now, in the middle of the COVID pandemic, which I think it's been a bit of a wake-up call to remind us that we are here, again, sharing this planet with a lot of microbes that may have sometimes the idea to just cause a pandemic, and that still can happen. And although we have great tools, obviously, what's happened in this pandemic has been amazing, how we managed to develop this vaccine so quickly. So this is an amazing scientific achievement. But even there's already more than 3.5 million official deaths of COVID. So we're still quite vulnerable to new viruses or new bacteria or whatever. So this is a bit what the book is about, how something that historically has been part of our lives, of human history, this interaction with bacteria, now still is a problem, and we need to still be aware of this. And it's not only COVID that is a problem. We have other pandemics that we don't talk about. We have the AIDS pandemic, which is still very much going on in some parts in the world. We have the flu that keeps coming back, and there's still danger that we may have another pandemic due to flu. There's tuberculosis. TB is a disease that's forgotten. It's a 19th century disease, but it's actually happening in parts of the world. You have this antibiotic-resistant TB that could be quite an important issue. We have malaria that kills millions of people and still a very big problem in some parts of the world. So in places like the US or in Europe, we tend to overlook these facts because we are quite okay here because we are not usually hit by these pandemics. And we think, oh, that's not a problem anymore. It is a problem. And not only that, but it can become an even bigger problem if we enter a pandemic like we are now, where the whole world now becomes part of this issue, this problem, and we all need to work together to try to find a way out.
Yeah, most definitely. My understanding of the reason they call it the Spanish flu, my understanding, and so quote unquote, was because no one wanted to talk about it or acknowledge it, and the Spanish press was the first to call it out and be like, "Hey, man, this is like a thing," and that's how they got stuck with the moniker of the Spanish flu. And it doesn't matter where it comes from; it's a pandemic, right?
Yeah, that's something that I don't think we realize now. Pandemic means a worldwide problem. And we're still thinking, oh, my country's doing fine. We're well vaccinated. This is okay. No, it's a pandemic. Until the whole world is vaccinated, this is not going to end. Yeah. So the US is going to is doing very well now. The UK is one of the top countries now in Europe with vaccination. There's countries in the world that are hitting 70-80% of the population being vaccinated. That's great, but that's not the end of the pandemic by a long shot. As long as there's places like India where there's the virus running free, or Brazil or any other places, this virus is going to mutate, it's going to change, and it's going to come back, and it can continue to give us problems, and definitely we cannot move around the planet freely if there is still virus in other places. So we need to think about pandemics as global problems that need to be solved globally, and we suck at this. We showed in these past months that we are really bad at coordinating a response to a global problem. Everybody goes and does their own thing, and there's no way that we together can fight this common problem we have.
Yeah, it's really interesting. People are resistant to, especially Republican politicians here, resistant to the WHO, overseeing government, worldwide body of outbreaks like this. And I imagine there are other countries and leaders that are as well. They don't want to fall under the rule of these things being called out, but we've seen the fallout and the damage from it. What's interesting is what you talked about, and something I thought about. I know that the Spanish, or I don't know this, but my understanding of the Spanish flu, one of the reasons it was brought back to America and hit us hard was because the returning GIs brought it back. But what was interesting is we weren't a global connected. We didn't have flights going everywhere to every country in the world. We weren't connected globally like we were this time. Like this time we were, like you say, we have this real global connection problem where we've got to fix this thing and attack it legally, or not legally, but legitimately, and do it very quickly. Otherwise things can get out of hand. And God knows, I always tell people, I'm like, imagine what the next one's going to be like. This one was pretty evil.
Exactly. Actually, could have been much worse. And I think we should see this one as a sort of a dress rehearsal, because although it's definitely bad. It's not half as bad or a tenth as bad as it could be. This is a virus that's relatively good, if you can call that as good. I mean, the coronavirus is pretty stable. So it's a virus that's not changing a lot. It does mutate, but not a lot. If you compare it to the flu, every year is different. It's completely different from one year to the other. So you need to develop new immunity. You need to vaccinate again. It doesn't look like the coronavirus is going that route. If you think about AIDS, the HIV is like the worst virus you can imagine. That virus changes not every year, but every day. So up to the point that, we've known HIV for 40 years now, and we haven't been able to develop a vaccine. It's not because we're not good or we're not investing money, it's because it's very difficult. So we got very lucky with coronaviruses that with this one, with the SARS-CoV-2, within weeks, we had a target, and was a stable target towards which we could build antibodies and do a vaccine. So we got very lucky there with a stable virus and a vaccine that came up very quickly, and a virus that is very contagious, yes, but the lethality is relatively low. The rate of death by coronavirus is around 2-3% maximum. The flu virus has a lethality of around 10%. So it's at least 5 times bigger. So imagine a virus like this, but 5 times the lethality. That's not, it wouldn't be the worst virus either. If you think about the Ebola virus has an 80% death rate. So 80%, obviously, that's a different thing. If we ever get a virus like this, we're screwed. But even a virus with a 5-6 times more lethality, we would have now, 20 million deaths. And that's because we didn't react, as you said, properly, quick enough, fast enough, and coordinated enough to actually stop this. These past weeks, there's been this whole report from the WHO saying, trying to analyze what went wrong at the beginning. And they're saying that everybody was very slow at reacting. And in a way, what happened with the Spanish flu, that the Spaniards said, we have a flu, didn't happen fast enough here in China. So the Chinese did communicate that there was a new disease, but a bit late. And then the WHO perhaps took a bit too long to say this was becoming pandemic. And this delay at the beginning is what's allowed for this sort of big ramp up at the beginning of the pandemic that led to the huge number of infections and the huge number of deaths. And again, this is a relatively benign virus compared to other viruses we know. So with a real aggressive virus, we would have the death toll would have been completely disastrous. So we should learn from this. We should realize that this, could be seen as a dress rehearsal. It's a pretty bad disease, but it's not as bad as it can be. We can be hit by a much worse virus in the future. So let's try to get our act together and find a way, like you were saying, WHO, for instance, it should be a sort of an organism that oversees the response to these sort of problems. And now it's seen more as a sort of a consulting body that you may or may not pay attention to. That's not how we can face sort of a global problem like this one.
Yeah, we even had an idiot remove us from the WHO, the United States.
Indeed,
you just can't even measure the dumbness of something like that. But here we are, 4 years of measuring a lot of dumbness. It was immeasurable. Here in the U.S., we're about 50. I think yesterday we announced we're 50% vaccinated, but we still have a whole lot of people that don't want to take the vaccination. We have this virus-resistant group, and a lot of it is just political dumbness and people on the right-wing fringes. It's interesting. Many of the people who supported the last moron from 4 years ago and voted for him, you can see that in their states, those are the ones that have the problem. Is there any basis, or what would you say to people that are trying to be vaccine resistant and they don't want to take the vaccine? Here in Utah, we're not even sure that we're going to get to herd immunity levels because so many people are resistant to the vaccine. Do people really have to worry about this? And what would you tell people that are like, I'm not sure I should take that virus because I'm the guy on Facebook, the meme says I shouldn't because that's clearly science.
No, it's a big issue. It's a problem, and we laugh about it and we mock it because it looks a silly thing, but it's becoming a serious problem for everybody. Because vaccination, some people see it as an individual act of freedom. So I vaccinate myself because I want to get vaccinated. But it's not only that; it's the thing that you do for the community. Because if you are vaccinated, the virus is not going to spread through you. If you are not vaccinated, you may be contributing to spread the virus to other people. So it's not only, you cannot just think about this is a personal choice. It is up to a point a personal choice, but it's also a choice you do for the community, for the global health. And that's, I think, it needs to be stressed. Now, what are the issues with vaccines? Are you afraid because they're not safe? That's not true. Vaccines, you have tons of data showing that vaccines are safe. There's no problem about that. None, obviously, there's the rare side effects. Yes, we know about those, and there's been detected, and they are now, we are aware that they may happen, 1 in a million or whatever. And if they happen, they can be treated. That's something that needs to go on record. That's true. But apart from that, the amount of lives that the vaccines are saving, that perhaps people that focus on the side effects don't focus on the other side. People that get vaccinated are basically now being saved. In the UK, for instance, now we have over 70% of the population vaccinated. The people that are ending up in the hospitals or dying just has plummeted. We almost don't see anybody in the hospitals now, or very little. So we're saving a lot of lives, and that's because of the vaccine, nothing else. Vaccines work for sure. Yeah. There's no doubt about it. Vaccines as a whole is one of the safest and more effective drugs we have, because they tend to have very little side effects, and they do tend to save a lot of lives because they just basically protect you against very bad diseases. Vaccines in general, I think, are a very good thing. This needs to be stressed. Our life expectancy basically doubled in the past century, thanks in good measure to vaccines. There was other things like antibiotics and there's general health improvements, but vaccines played a very important role in reducing the child mortality to almost nothing. In the beginning of the 20th century, half of the kids in some countries would die, would not make it to adult life. And that was stopped thanks to vaccines. Now, you translate this into COVID times. At this moment, the only way we have to control this disease is the vaccine. We don't have a drug. For instance, we're talking about AIDS. So AIDS, we have good drugs to stop the virus. We don't have a vaccine, but at least we can stop the virus. For COVID, we don't have a drug. So there's no way that you can stop this virus from reproducing once you have it inside. You have to wait to get to see how your immune system fights this virus. So the only way we can help that is just to try to boost the immune system by giving a vaccine so that your immune system can fight this. And that's the only thing we have. And unless we all reach a certain percentage of vaccination in all the countries in the world, this is not going to go away, because this virus, we see it is very infectious. So it just keeps spreading. So as long as there's people that's susceptible, it's going to move around. So that's why it's so important that everybody everywhere. So it's not enough to say, oh, my city is vaccinated or my country is well vaccinated. No, because if your neighbors are not, it's going to come back to you. This virus is going to evolve. It's going to keep spreading and circulating. So I guess that's the only thing that you can say to these people that are still doubting. Look for the right sources. You're right. Don't believe the first guy that you see on internet. Internet is great. And again, you were talking about how this is the first pandemic in a sort of a hyper-connected world. And this is the first pandemic also in the era of internet. So information flows at a rate that's never been seen before. And this is good and it's bad, because this allows us to actually know what's going on in real time. So if something happens in China now, we know it in 1 minute. But also, this information spreads equally fast. Yeah. So that's very dangerous. How do you deal with that?
What's the old saying? A lie spreads around the world in a day, and the truth takes weeks, or something like that. It's very interesting to me. Now, this is a new type of vaccine where it's I think an mRNA or something like that. Tell us a little about that, because I think it holds a great future for vaccines and drugs and how we deal with some of the different things in life. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. That's a very interesting topic indeed, because one of the misconceptions, again, of the vaccines is they have been developed so quickly that they cannot be safe. And that's not really true. They have been developed quickly, but the final stages. So this is not a technology that just appeared out of nowhere in 2019. mRNA vaccines have been researched for the first time that somebody mentioned this idea of the mRNA vaccines was in 1989. So it's been around for 30 years, the whole concept of how you develop an mRNA vaccine. And they have been developed and studied, and all the processes have been studied very carefully. The problem is that none of this had reached yet to the stage of a clinical drug that you could give to people in 2019. There were clinical trials already for vaccines with that technology, but since there was not an urgency, it was going on the background. And probably in the next 3, 4, 5 years, we would have probably seen the first mRNA vaccine reach the clinic. But since there was this urgency now, a lot of money and effort and manpower was poured into finish the development of this drug. And what it does, actually, this kind of vaccine is very interesting because vaccines started as you basically get the virus or whatever microbe that you want to protect against, and you inactivate it, and then you inject it. So you are basically injecting a weak version of the virus to stimulate a response without making you sick. So that was the classic vaccine. Now, that was good, but it has some problems. Like sometimes you can get sick from the vaccine, from these old vaccines. So we improved that, and instead of injecting the whole virus, we started injecting pieces of the virus. The protein cycle. Virus is basically some sort of a different shapes, but it has a sort of a capsule and then some genes inside. So the capsule is made out of proteins normally. So if you get one of these proteins and you inject it, you sometimes get the same response. And that's what the next step of vaccines were. Now we moved even farther to a new level of vaccines, which is we don't inject the protein, we don't inject the virus, we inject the instructions to make the protein. So like we're injecting a piece of gene, which is just a piece of genetic code, that once it's inside our cells make that protein, it's a viral protein, and generates that sort of immune response. Now, people saying, oh, these viruses, these vaccines are modifying my DNA, they're changing my genes. That's not how it works. That's not the case. It may sound scary, but it's not how it is. It's very similar as being infected by a virus. You're going to get a piece of a genetic code from a virus, which is going to make a protein, and that's going to go away. So that's going to degrade and disappear very quickly. So it's not going to get stuck into your DNA or change you in any way. So there's no real risk in any of these vaccines, the mRNA vaccines or the other type of vaccines, the viral vector vaccines, which also use similar technology. They're not going to change or modify your DNA because that's not how it happens. And then what we saw is that these vaccines, if you look at the percentage of response in these vaccines, is amazing. So they give a protection of around 98%. That's very unusual for a vaccine. Most of the vaccines we have are not that good. If you think about the flu vaccine, there's years that there's only like 20-30% protection, and we consider it's good enough, and we just give it. The malaria vaccine, the first vaccine against malaria, had around a 30-35% protection. We saw it as a huge development because we had nothing to protect people against malaria. Now, we are talking about a vaccine that would give you a 98% protection. That's unheard of, and that's very powerful, and that's mostly or in part due to this new technology that we developed. We need to be appreciative and conscious of how much science went into this, how much knowledge went into this, how much effort from a lot of scientists over the decades to actually get us to this point that we can generate a vaccine that is very powerful. It gets you a huge response against this virus and protects you even more than we thought in the initial clinical trials. In all the countries now with good percentage of vaccination, as we said, all the rates of infection and mortality just going down. So I think it looks as good as it can be.
That's interesting. It's really wild. It just gives your body a blueprint and says, here you go. And that can be really helpful. So what do you see the future? We're getting down on the hour. What do you see in the future for COVID? Do you see, with the way we're going and we're haphazarding, India is completely out of control. What would be your prediction, or what do you see us coming out of this? What do you see, I guess, for the future?
I think the main danger now is to see this as it's almost ending and that's it, and the pandemic is almost over. In countries like in the US or in Europe, that's sort of the feeling you're getting because you're seeing how the cases are going down, and I say, oh, that's it, we're done. And as you say, as long as India or other countries have that much virus running around, that's definitely not the end for anybody. And actually, we're seeing it now in the UK. So UK had the cases under control, very well under control in the past weeks, and now it's slowly surging again because we are getting a lot of this Indian version, and that's the danger. So all the work that you did, all the effort that you did to control the pandemic, it can just evaporate when you get a new variant coming in. So that's always a risk. My predictions, I'm guessing we're going to see 2 or 3 endings of this pandemic. So the first ending would be for countries like ours that have a good rate of vaccination. Probably before the end of the year, we're going to recover most of our normal life. Most, I would say, not 100%, but we're probably going to be able to get rid of the masks. Probably we're going to have a decent enough level of vaccination, and the mortality is going to go down. That's the first end, but it's not a real end of the pandemic because the pandemic is still going around. The second real ending of the pandemic would be once everybody in the world is vaccinated enough to stop the spread of the virus. And this is going to happen in 2-3 years. It's not going to happen immediately.
Seriously, because 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, because at least because the rate of vaccination in our countries is so quick that it's making actually vaccines not available for the rest of the world. So there's countries that haven't even started. Yeah. So there's a lot of places in Africa, South America, they have almost nothing to go around. So these guys are going to start vaccinating these years, hopefully, but it's going to take another year perhaps to get the full population vaccinated. So we're looking around at least another year or two to get to a good level globally. So that would be perhaps the second real end of the pandemic. But then we're entering the post-pandemic stage. This virus is not going away. This virus is here to stay, like the flu virus, like any other viruses that we have. So we're going to have to learn to live with this virus. So what does that mean? It means like probably once we're all vaccinated and we have immunity, maybe this virus is going to keep doing like have spread a bit. Or here, might be an outbreak in that place or the other one, maybe a new variant coming. We may have to revaccinate part of the population like we do with the flu every year. So we have to see exactly what's going to happen, how this virus is going to become part of our life. But it's not going away, that's the thing. So we're going to have it under control for sure, but still we're going to have to deal with it.
So would technically the pandemic not be over for 2 to 3 years then?
Yeah, if you remember, the pandemic is the worldwide kind of problem.
Yeah.
The world is not going to get rid of the virus this year.
And we're so interconnected with flights and ships.
Yep, that's the thing. So as you do the Olympics in Tokyo, what's going to happen? So you're going to spread the virus. I mean, that's
going down.
That's a given, right?
Oh, man. Wow, man, you just blew my freaking mind. I was thinking this would be over the end of this year the way I was going, and you're definitely on the big picture. I think I'm American, so we only give a shit about us. Classic asshole American. Anyway, but no, that does make sense. I've been watching the bodies they're burning in India and just the extraordinary fallout there, and it's just heartbreaking. But this is where we go. And I've heard that they may have to update our shots, and I've got mine. I've got the 5G right here. Bill Gates. He's not home right now. So I think he's out looking for a new wife. So there's that. We're rounding up the hour. Anything you want to touch on in the book to get people to go out and buy it or tease out to get people to go pick that baby up?
Yeah, sure. Everybody go out and buy this book. It's full of good stories about viruses and bacteria. I think it's a mix of history lesson, if you want, a bit going through the ages, how bacteria and viruses play a role. And obviously for the American continent, it was a huge difference, a huge impact that when the Europeans came and discovered, if you want to call it like that, America, they brought into America a lot of diseases that the Americans didn't have at that time. And that's how basically the whole conquest of America happened, because all the Native Americans were dead within a year due to the diseases, not due to the superiority of the Spanish army, just because they were getting killed by all the bacteria and viruses that we brought to the new continent. So this is part of the book as well. There's pieces of history that are interesting. Also, a bit of how we got to this point where we now have antibiotics and vaccines and everything, how we developed these tools. What are the most important dangers we have right now we're facing? We're talking about malaria, TB, all these things, how this may play a role. And obviously COVID, how are we dealing with COVID and what's going to happen with it? So if you are into this sort of stuff, I think me as a scientist, I like reading about science, but I think it's important that everybody has a bit of knowledge about science, because today we're talking about mRNA, and most people don't know even what RNA is. And I think nowadays you cannot afford not to know this. I mean, because they're going to inject you with RNA, and you need to know what RNA is because it's going to go into your body. So I think a bit more knowledge, basic knowledge on science. I think everybody should, not only this book, but everybody should go out and read science books, because science books, if they are well written, they're fun. There's a ton of good writers out there that can make it interesting.
Yeah, they need to quit reading the books that aren't science. The one thing on this book, if you have relatives or friends that are resistant to getting the vaccine, would this be a good book to give them, or at least hit them with?
Definitely, I think so.
Whack them upside the head. I'm not encouraging violence in any way, shape, or form, by the way.
And then you have to buy the hardcover then if you want to use it like that. But
I mean, that could be assault, so maybe I'll just throw the paperback at him so it bounces off and I don't whatever. But no, this sounds like a great book. And yeah, we need to get more into science and understanding science and quit living like cavemen where we're in some cave going, oh no, there's an outside world that scares me. You're just like, come on, man, people. Come on.
I agree. Science is fun too. So it's not only necessary, but it's also fun. So if you find the right book and a right writer, and you guys in the US have great popular science writers, so just go out to your bookstore and find a science book and enjoy it. It's lots of fun.
There you go. Give it away to all the anti-vaxxer people. Give the book away. Salvador, it's been wonderful to have you on the show. Thank you for coming on and spending some time with us, enlightening us, and hopefully we educated some people here and we'll get the world vaccinated even more now. Thank you for coming on, sir.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you very much. Guys, go pre-order the book. It comes out June 2nd in America. I think it's been out for a while across overseas there. Modern Epidemics, from the Spanish flu to COVID-19. There'll be a link on the Chris Voss Show. Go to youtube.com/Chris Voss, hit the bell notification button, and also go to goodreads.com/Chris Voss. Subscribe to us over there and all the different groups we have on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all those different things. See us over there as well. We certainly appreciate you guys tuning in. Stay safe, get vaccinated, and we'll see you guys next time.